The Galactic Naval Academy stretched across 3 moons of the Kepler 442 system, its massive structures gleaming like silver monuments against the star-filled void. Within its halls, the future leaders of an empire spanning 12,000 worlds learned the art of war, diplomacy, and command. Every species that had earned membership in the Galactic Confederation sent their finest young minds here, from the crystalline Shardesh who thought in mathematical equations to the gaseous nebulae who existed as pure energy contained in mechanical suits. But, in the hierarchy that naturally formed among the cadets, humans occupied the bottom rung, and everyone knew it. Cadet Jackson Reeves pressed his back against the cold metal wall of Training Bay 7, watching 3 figures advance toward him through the dim emergency lighting. The bay had been scheduled for maintenance, making it the perfect place for what was about to happen. His dark hair was still damp with sweat from the morning's combat drills, where he had once again finished dead last among his class. "Look at the little earthling," hissed Vexkar, the lead Zenthari whose reptilian features twisted into what passed for a smile among his species. Standing nearly 7 feet tall with scales that shifted from deep green to black depending on his mood, Vexkar represented everything humans weren't. His claws could slice through steel plating, his reflexes were 3 times faster than any human, and his strength could crush a man's skull like an eggshell. All alone in the dark. How fitting. Behind him stood Throck, a Krolix whose massive frame filled the narrow walkway between training equipment. The bear-like alien's thick fur bristled with excitement, his small black eyes gleaming with anticipation. Krolix were known throughout the galaxy for their incredible physical strength and their love of violence. In their culture, might truly did make right, and humans were seen as barely worthy of contempt. The third member of their group was Zelthes, a Vailtar whose pale, elongated features and large black eyes gave him an ethereal appearance that masked a cruel intelligence. The Vailtar possessed limited telepathic abilities and enhanced cognitive processing speed, making them natural tacticians and strategists. They also possessed an arrogance that made them particularly fond of tormenting species they considered inferior. "We've been watching you, human," Zelthes said, his voice carrying the slight metallic undertone common to his species. "Your performance in combat simulations has been educational." Jackson straightened his shoulders, refusing to show fear despite the sick feeling growing in his stomach. At 19, he had been one of the youngest humans ever accepted to the academy, earning his place through exceptional scores in theoretical examinations and tactical planning exercises. But theory meant nothing when you were facing 3 aliens who could each kill you without breaking a sweat. "If you have something to say, say it," Jackson replied, keeping his voice steady. He had learned early in his time at the academy that showing weakness only made things worse. Vaxkar's laugh was a sound like glass breaking. "Oh, we don't need to say anything, little human. We're here to demonstrate something important. You see, there are 67 different species represented at this academy, and every single one of them is superior to yours in some meaningful way. The Zenthari are faster and stronger," Throck rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. "The Krolix are the mightiest warriors in known space. The Vailtar possess mental abilities you can't even comprehend. And humans?" Zelthes tilted his head, black eyes studying Jackson like he was an interesting specimen. "Humans are here because your species happened to stumble onto faster-than-light travel at the right moment in galactic history. You're a charity case, Reeves. A reminder of what happens when politics interferes with merit." Jackson felt anger flare in his chest, but he forced it down. "Getting emotional would only make this worse. If you're trying to make me angry, it won't work. I know what I am and what I'm not. Do you?" Vexkar stepped closer, his claws extending slightly from his fingertips. "Because your actions suggest otherwise. You try so hard in every class, pushing yourself beyond your natural limitations. It's almost admirable, if it weren't so pathetic." The truth of those words hit harder than any physical blow could have. Jackson did push himself beyond his limits every day, staying up late to study tactics that came naturally to other species, spending extra hours in the gym trying to build strength that would never match his alien classmates, practicing with weapons that felt clumsy in his too slow hands. "We're going to do you a favor," Throck said, flexing his massive hands. "We're going to give you a lesson in reality. Help you understand your place in the natural order. Think of it as an educational experience," Zelthes added with mock concern. "After all, better to learn these hard truths here, among fellow cadets, than to discover them in actual combat where your weakness could get real soldiers killed." Jackson's mind raced, calculating angles and distances. The nearest exit was 15 meters away, blocked by Vexkar. The emergency alarm was on the far wall, but Frock stood between him and any chance of reaching it. The Krolix alone weighed nearly 400 pounds and could move with surprising speed when motivated.
Nothing to say, human?
Vexgar raised one clawed hand, the razor-sharp tips gleaming in the low light.
Perhaps a few scars will help you remember this lesson. The Zenthri drew his arm back, preparing to deliver a strike that would leave permanent marks across Jackson's face.
The blow would be precisely calculated, painful and humiliating, but not quite severe enough to result in serious disciplinary action. It was a tactic these three had perfected over the course of their academy careers. Time seemed to slow as Jackson watched the claws descend toward him. He had nowhere to run, no hope of fighting back against three opponents who were each physically superior to him in every way.
This was the reality of being human in a galaxy full of apex predators.
This was his place in the natural order. The claws were inches from his face when a blur of motion exploded from the shadows near the equipment racks. A human figure launched herself through the air with impossible speed and precision, her body moving in ways that defied everything Jackson thought he knew about human limitations. She intercepted Vexgar's strike with one hand while driving her other fist directly into the Zenthri's solar plexus with enough force to lift his feet off the ground. Vexgar's eyes went wide with shock and pain as he doubled over, gasping for air. The newcomer landed in a perfect combat crouch, her movements fluid and controlled in a way that spoke of years of intensive training. "That's not how you treat a fellow cadet," she said calmly, her voice carrying a slight accent that Jackson couldn't immediately place. The girl, for she appeared to be roughly his own age, was clearly human, but there was something different about her. She stood with the balanced poise of a predator, every muscle in her compact frame ready for explosive action. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her academy uniform showed signs of modification that suggested she had seen real combat. But it was her eyes that truly set her apart. They held a coldness, a calculating intelligence that reminded Jackson of the way veteran soldiers looked at the world. These weren't the eyes of a teenager who had grown up in the safety of human space. These were the eyes of someone who had learned hard lessons in places where making mistakes meant dying. Who are you?" Jackson stammered, unable to process what he had just witnessed. "Maya Chen," she replied without taking her attention off the three aliens.
"Transfer student from the Outer Rim colonies."
Vexgar straightened slowly, his scaled features twisted with rage and disbelief.
"You dare strike a Zenthri? Do you have any idea what you've just done, human?"
"I stopped you from committing assault on a fellow cadet," Maya replied evenly.
"I'd say that makes me the responsible party in this situation."
Frock stepped forward, his massive frame seeming to fill the entire training bay.
"You got lucky, little girl." Vexgar wasn't expecting resistance.
"But now you face a Krolix warrior.
Your species' reputation for weakness is well earned."
Maya tilted her head slightly, studying the massive alien with the same dispassionate interest a scientist might show when examining a particularly interesting specimen.
"Reputation is just another word for assumption. And assumptions get people killed."
"Enough talk," Zalthes hissed, his telepathic abilities allowing him to sense the shift in the situation's dynamic.
"Both of you will learn your place."
What happened next would be talked about in whispered conversations throughout the academy for months to come.
Frock charged with all the devastating power that had made the Krolix feared throughout the galaxy.
His massive fists swung in deadly arcs that could have crushed a hovercar, but Maya wasn't there when they arrived. She moved like liquid shadow, flowing around his attacks with an economy of motion that was both beautiful and terrifying. Her counterstrike was a thing of precision and brutality. She drove her knee upward into a nerve cluster just below Throck's ribcage, a spot that few beings outside of the Krolix species even knew existed. The massive alien's eyes rolled back as his nervous system temporarily overloaded, sending him crashing to the deck like a felled tree. Vexgar recovered enough to launch himself at Maya's back, his claws extended for a killing strike. She sensed his approach without turning, dropping into a spinning leg sweep that took his feet out from under him while simultaneously driving her elbow backward into his descending form. The impact sent him sprawling across the training mats, his reptilian features slack with shock. Zalthes, seeing his companions defeated in seconds, attempted to use his telepathic abilities to disorient the human girl. He projected waves of confusion and fear directly into her mind, a technique that had proven effective against every other species he had encountered. Maya paused for a moment, her expression flickering as the mental assault hit her. Then, she smiled, and there was nothing pleasant about the expression. "Telepathic attack?" she asked conversationally.
That's interesting. We had a lot of experience with that in the mining colonies.
She moved toward Zelfes with deliberate steps, seemingly unaffected by his mental intrusion. The Veiltar's large eyes widened with growing panic as he increased the intensity of his telepathic assault, pushing his abilities to their absolute limit.
You see, Maya continued, her voice never changing tone despite the psychic attack, when you grow up in the deep mines of Luna's outer system, you learn to function with all kinds of interference in your head. Radiation, magnetic fields, atmospheric pressure changes that mess with your inner ear. You develop a kind of mental discipline that most people never need.
She reached out and placed one hand on Zelfessa's elongated throat, applying just enough pressure to make her point clear. Your telepathic abilities are impressive, but they're designed to work against species who've never had to learn real mental fortitude.
Against someone who's been trained to function with a migraine while explosive charges are going off around them? Not so much. The Veiltar's telepathic attack faltered as fear overwhelmed his concentration.
Maya released him, and he stumbled backward, his pale features even more colorless than usual.
Now, Maya said, turning her attention to all three aliens who were now watching her with expressions of shock, fear, and newfound respect, I think you gentlemen owe Cadet Reeves an apology.
You can't be human, Vexkar whispered, still clutching his midsection where her initial strike had landed.
No human moves like that. No human is that strong.
Maya's expression softened slightly, and, for a moment she looked like what she was, a teenager far from home.
I'm as human as they come. I'm just from a different kind of human experience than most people understand.
She gestured toward Jackson, who was still pressed against the wall, his mind struggling to process what he had witnessed. Cadet Reeves here represents one kind of human, the kind who gets into the academy through intelligence and determination, who fights every day to prove himself worthy of standing alongside species that evolution gave natural advantages. Her voice grew harder as she continued.
I represent another kind of human, the kind who grew up in places where being weak meant dying, where every day was a test of whether you were tough enough to see another sunrise. The kind who learned that when the galaxy tells you you're not strong enough, smart enough, or fast enough, you find a way to become all three anyway.
Frock struggled to his feet, his massive frame swaying as he fought off the effects of her nerve strike.
The Krolix do not acknowledge defeat to any lesser species. That's fine, Maya replied with a shrug. You don't have to acknowledge it. But you're going to live with it.
And every time you see a human in these halls, you're going to remember that we're not as weak as you thought we were. She moved to help Jackson away from the wall, her manner completely transformed from the cold efficiency she had displayed moments before.
Are you hurt? Jackson shook his head, still staring at her in amazement. How did you? I mean, where did you learn to fight like that?
The Outer Rim colonies aren't like the core worlds, Maya explained. Out there, humans don't have the luxury of being the protected junior partners in this galactic confederation. We have to hold our own against pirates, raiders, and, worse. You learn or you die. Zalfes found his voice again, though it shook with residual fear.
This isn't over, human. The Academy has rules about violence between cadets. Maya turned to look at him with that cold smile again. You're absolutely right.
And, according to those rules, 3 senior cadets cornering a junior cadet in an isolated location for the purpose of assault is a serious violation.
Should we report this incident to Academy security? The 3 aliens exchanged glances, each recognizing the trap they had walked into.
They had intended to deliver a lesson in humility that would never be reported, relying on their victims' reluctance to appear even weaker by calling for help. Now they faced the choice between accepting their defeat quietly or escalating to official channels where their own actions would come under scrutiny.
We'll consider this a learning experience for everyone involved, Vexkar said finally, his voice tight with suppressed rage. Smart choice, Maya replied.
I hope we all learned something valuable today. As the 3 aliens filed out of the training bay, each nursing their wounds and their wounded pride, Jackson found himself alone with his unexpected rescuer.
Thank you, he said simply. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't shown up.
Maya studied his face for a moment, seeming to weigh her words carefully.
They would have hurt you, but not seriously. Bullies like that are usually smart enough to stay just below the line that would bring real consequences. They wanted to break your spirit, not your body.
Well, they would have succeeded, Jackson admitted. I was ready to give up, to accept that humans really don't belong here.
Do you still feel that way? Jackson thought about the question, replaying the events of the last few minutes in his mind.
He had seen a human, a girl who couldn't be much older than himself, defeat 3 alien opponents who should have been able to crush her without effort. More than that, she had done it with a skill and confidence that spoke of extensive real-world experience. "No," he said finally. "I don't think I do." Maya nodded approvingly. "Good. Because the galaxy's full of people who will tell you what humans can and can't do. Most of them have never met a human who refused to accept those limitations." She started toward the exit, then paused and looked back at him. "What's your specialty here at the Academy?" "Tactical analysis and strategic planning," Jackson replied. "I'm good with numbers and patterns, seeing how different elements fit together in complex situations." "And combat training?" "Dead last in my class," he admitted with a rueful smile. "Every time." Maya's expression grew thoughtful. "That might be about to change. Are you interested in learning what humans are really capable of when they stop accepting other people's definitions of their limitations?" Jackson felt something stir in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced since his first day at the Academy. It was hope, but more than that. It was the beginning of pride. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Yes, I am." "Good," Maya replied. "Because the galaxy's about to learn that humans aren't just the weak link in the galactic chain. We're the element that nobody saw coming, the variable that changes the entire equation." As she walked away, Jackson remained in the training bay for several minutes, thinking about what had just happened. For the first time since arriving at the Academy, he didn't feel like an inferior pretender trying to compete with his betters. He felt like something else entirely, a human who was just beginning to understand what that really meant. Outside the Academy's walls, the three moons continued their eternal dance around Kepler 442's primary star, and the business of training the galaxy's future leaders continued as it had for centuries. But, in Training Bay 7, something fundamental had shifted in the delicate balance of power that governed the relationships between species. The galaxy thought it knew what humans were. It was about to discover how wrong it had been. The next morning brought an unexpected change to the Academy's routine. Word of the incident in Training Bay 7 had spread through the complex network of cadet gossip that connected every dormitory, classroom, and training facility. By the time Jackson made his way to the morning meal hall, he found himself the subject of curious stares and whispered conversations. The vast dining facility accommodated thousands of cadets from dozens of species, each group gravitating toward others of their kind in an unspoken segregation that reflected the broader politics of the Galactic Confederation. Humans occupied several tables near the facility's edge, their conversations typically muted compared to the more boisterous exchanges of their alien classmates. But today was different. As Jackson approached the human section with his meal tray, he noticed that the usual subdued atmosphere had been replaced by something approaching excitement. Conversation stopped as he sat down, and he found himself facing a dozen expectant faces. "Is it true?" asked Sarah Martinez, a second-year cadet from the Sol system whose expertise in xenobiology had earned her respect even among alien instructors. "Did someone really take down Vexcar and his crew?" Before Jackson could answer, a familiar voice spoke from behind him. "It's true, but he's not the one who did it." Maya Chen appeared at their table carrying a standard Academy meal tray, her appearance drawing immediate attention from every human present. In the bright lighting of the dining hall, Jackson could see details he had missed in the dim training bay. Her Academy uniform bore subtle modifications, reinforced stress points, extra pockets, and what appeared to be concealed armor plating. More telling were the small scars on her hands and arms, the kind that came from real combat rather than training exercises. "Maya Chen," she said by way of introduction, settling into an empty seat with the fluid grace that seemed to characterize all her movements. "Transfer from Titan Base in the Outer Rim." The name recognition was immediate. Titan Base was one of the most remote human outposts, located in a sector known for pirate activity and constant conflict with hostile alien factions that hadn't joined the Confederation. Cadets assigned there were typically those being groomed for the most dangerous assignments in human space. "You're from the Rim," breathed David Park, a third-year engineering student whose brother served on a patrol frigate in that same region. "What was it like out there?" Maya's expression grew distant for a moment, as if she were seeing something beyond the Academy's sterile walls. "Different from here. Out on the Rim, humans don't have the luxury of being the junior partners. When raiders hit a mining station or pirates attack a transport convoy, nobody's coming to save you because you're too weak to save yourself. She took a bite of the synthesized protein that passed for food throughout most of the galaxy, chewing thoughtfully before continuing.
My parents were mining engineers on Kepler 438c.
Beautiful world, rich mineral deposits, and about as far from civilized space as you could get while still being technically part of the Confederation.
Were? Sarah asked gently. Korthak raiders, Maya replied without emotion.
I was 14 when they hit our settlement.
They don't take prisoners, and they don't leave witnesses.
A sobering silence fell over the table. The Korthak were a species that had refused to join the Confederation, preferring to exist as nomadic raiders who preyed on isolated settlements and shipping lanes. Their reputation for brutality was well established, and human colonies were considered particularly vulnerable targets.
How did you survive? Jackson asked. Maya's smile held no warmth.
Because the humans who settled the rim aren't the same as the ones who live in the safety of the core worlds.
My parents weren't just miners, they were former military.
Dad was a demolitions expert who had served in the Centauri suppression campaign. Mom was a combat medic who had seen action against the vegan insurgency. She gestured around the dining hall, taking in the diverse array of alien species.
Everyone here looks at humans and sees the weakest link because that's what they've been taught.
But they're judging us based on the humans who've never had to fight for their survival. They've never met the humans who grew up where being weak meant being dead.
David leaned forward, his engineering mind clearly fascinated by the implications. What kind of training did you have? Everything, Maya replied simply. Combat training from the time I could walk. Weapons proficiency with human and alien technology. Survival skills for a dozen different hostile environments. Mental conditioning to resist telepathic intrusion and psychological warfare.
She paused, studying the faces around her. But, more than that, we learned something that most humans in the Confederation have forgotten.
We learned that when the galaxy tells you you're not good enough, the answer isn't to accept it.
The answer is to become something better than what anyone thought possible. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an unwelcome presence. Vexkar approached their table with deliberate steps, his reptilian features showing no sign of the previous night's encounter. Behind him came a small group of Zenthri cadets, their scales shifting to darker hues that indicated aggressive intent. The human who thinks herself a warrior, Vexkar said, his voice carrying clearly through the dining hall.
I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Maya looked up at him with apparent disinterest, continuing to eat her meal.
Have you? How nice for you.
You seem to have given some of my fellow humans the wrong impression about last night, Vexkar continued, his tone deceptively conversational.
They think you actually defeated me in combat. I thought it important to clarify what really happened.
Please do, Maya replied calmly. I'm always interested in alternate interpretations of events. Vexkar's smile revealed rows of needle-sharp teeth. You caught me off guard with a sucker punch while I was focused on the coward behind you. Hardly what anyone would call a fair fight, much less a victory. The dining hall had grown noticeably quieter as word of the confrontation spread through the room. Hundreds of alien cadets turned their attention toward the human table, eager to witness what they assumed would be a public humiliation that would restore the natural order. Maya set down her eating utensil and stood slowly, her movement drawing gasps from several nearby tables. At 5 feet and 6 inches, she was dwarfed by the 7-foot Zenthri, but her posture suggested she felt no intimidation whatsoever. You're right, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the now silent dining hall. It wasn't a fair fight.
Vexkar's smile widened, assuming she was about to concede his superiority.
It wasn't fair because you brought friends and cornered someone who was alone and unprepared, Maya continued. It wasn't fair because you used your natural advantages to bully someone weaker than yourself. And it wasn't fair because you mistook cruelty for strength. She stepped closer to the towering alien, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. But, if you're interested in a fair fight, I'm happy to accommodate you. The challenge hung in the air like a live electric charge. Academy regulations were strict about unauthorized combat between cadets, but they included provisions for formal dueling under controlled circumstances. Such challenges were rare, typically reserved for matters of honor between senior cadets from warrior species.
You would challenge a Zenthri to formal combat?
Vexkar asked, his voice heavy with disbelief.
Do you have any concept of what you're suggesting?
I have a very clear concept, Maya replied. I'm suggesting that you put your natural advantages against human determination and see which one proves superior. The implications rippled through the dining hall like a shock wave. No human had ever formally challenged a member of one of the galaxy's recognized warrior species. The very idea violated everything the Confederation understood about the natural hierarchy of military effectiveness. "This is madness," hissed one of Vexcar's companions. "The human will be torn apart." "Then, you should have no trouble accepting," Maya said without taking her eyes off Vexcar. "Unless, of course, you're afraid that last night wasn't as much of a fluke as you claim." Vexcar's scales darkened to almost pure black, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. To refuse the challenge now would be seen as weakness, not just by the humans but by every alien species that valued martial prowess. But, to accept meant risking the possibility of losing to what everyone considered the galaxy's most inferior warrior race. "Very well," he said finally. "I accept your challenge. The combat rings, tomorrow evening, full Academy regulations." "Excellent," Maya replied with a smile that made several nearby cadets step backward. "I look forward to it." As Vexcar and his companions departed, the dining hall erupted in conversation. The news would spread throughout the Academy within hours, and, by evening every cadet, instructor, and administrator would know about the unprecedented challenge. "Are you insane?" Sarah whispered as Maya resumed her seat. "Do you know what you just committed to?" "A formal duel against one of the most dangerous hand-to-hand combatants in the Academy," Maya replied calmly. "Standard rules, no weapons, victory by submission or incapacitation." "He'll kill you," David said bluntly. "Zenthary claws can slice through reinforced battle armor. Their reaction time is 3 times faster than human baseline." "He's been training in combat techniques since before he could walk." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "All true. He has significant advantages." "Then, why?" Jackson asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Because someone needs to show this place that humans aren't the weaklings everyone thinks we are," Maya replied. "Because everyday cadets like you get pushed around and humiliated, and nobody does anything about it because everyone assumes that's just the natural order." She gestured toward the other tables, where alien cadets were still buzzing with excitement about the upcoming duel. "Look at them. They're not discussing whether Vexcar will win. They're discussing how quickly he'll win and how badly he'll hurt me in the process." To them, the outcome is foregone because they've never seen what humans are really capable of. "And, you think you can change that?" Sarah asked. Maya's expression grew serious. "I know I can. Because I've been places and seen things that nobody here has experienced. I've fought enemies who make Academy bullies look like children playing games. I've survived situations that would break most people, and I did it because I refused to accept anyone else's definition of my limitations." She stood again, picking up her meal tray. "Tomorrow night, this Academy is going to learn something new about humanity. They're going to learn that when you push us far enough, we don't just push back. We push harder than anyone thought possible." As she walked away, leaving the human table in stunned silence, Jackson felt something he had never experienced during his time at the Academy. For the first time since arriving, he felt genuinely proud to be human. The rest of the day passed in a blur of speculation and preparation. News of the challenge had indeed spread throughout the Academy with the speed that only truly shocking events could achieve. Instructors who had never shown interest in human cadets suddenly appeared in their classes, studying Maya with newfound curiosity. Betting pools sprang up among the alien students, with odds heavily favoring Vexcar. But there were other reactions as well. Human cadets who had spent years accepting their place at the bottom of the social hierarchy began to walk with straighter backs and speak with stronger voices. The simple fact that one of their number had dared to challenge the established order seemed to awaken something that had been dormant. Jackson found Maya that evening in one of the Academy's smaller training facilities, a space typically reserved for individual practice sessions. She moved through a complex series of combat forms with fluid precision, her body flowing from one position to another with the kind of natural grace that spoke of thousands of hours of training. "Nervous?" he asked as she completed the sequence. "Always," she replied, toweling off sweat. "Only idiots aren't nervous before a fight. The trick is using that nervous energy instead of letting it use you." "Vexcar has been training for this his entire life," Jackson pointed out. "He's faster, stronger, and has natural weapons that can cut through steel." Maya nodded. He also has weaknesses that he doesn't know about because nobody's ever exploited them.
The Zenthari fighting style is designed for combat against other Zenthari, or against enemies who fight like them. They're not prepared for someone who approaches combat from a completely different philosophical framework.
She gestured for him to join her in the center of the training area.
Show me how you would attack a Zenthari. Jackson hesitated. I don't really know how to fight. Humor me. Based on what you've observed, how would you go about attacking someone like Vexkar? Jackson thought about it, his tactical mind automatically analyzing the problem.
I suppose I'd try to use my speed advantage to stay away from his claws, maybe look for an opening to strike at vulnerable points. That's how most species would approach it, Maya agreed.
But, it's also exactly what he's trained to counter.
Zenthari combat techniques are specifically designed to neutralize opponents who try to use speed and agility to overcome their natural advantages. She moved to a position directly in front of him.
Now, what if I told you that the secret to defeating a Zenthari isn't to avoid their natural weapons, but to get close enough that they can't use them effectively? That doesn't make sense, Jackson protested. Getting close to those claws would be suicide. Would it? Maya asked. Or would it force him into a range where his advantages become liabilities?
She demonstrated, moving to a position where she was almost touching Jackson's chest.
At this range, how much room do I have to swing my arms? Jackson realized immediately what she meant. Almost none. You'd have to use short, controlled movements. Exactly. And what happens to all that Zenthari speed and strength when they can't build up momentum for their strikes? The implications began to dawn on Jackson. It becomes useless. Not useless, Maya corrected. But significantly reduced. And, when you take away their primary advantages, what are you left with? A fight between equals, Jackson said slowly. Better than equals, Maya smiled. Because while he's been training his entire life to be a Zenthari warrior, I've been training to be something else entirely.
I've been training to be a human who refuses to accept that there are things she can't do. As they continued to talk through the evening, Jackson began to understand that the upcoming duel was about more than just one human challenging one alien. It was about fundamentally changing how an entire galaxy viewed humanity's place in the cosmic order. And, tomorrow night, everyone would see whether humans were ready to claim their rightful place among the stars. The Academy's main combat arena had never hosted a crowd quite like this one. Built to accommodate formal duels between cadets, the circular chamber could hold nearly 3,000 spectators in tiered seating that rose toward a domed ceiling filled with recording equipment. Tonight, every seat was filled, and hundreds more cadets crowded the standing areas despite regulations limiting attendance. Word had spread far beyond the Academy itself. Senior instructors from every department occupied the VIP observation deck, their expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed anticipation of the spectacle to come. Several had placed unofficial wagers on the duration of the fight, with most betting it would end within the first 30 seconds. At the center of it all stood the combat ring itself, a circular platform 20 meters in diameter, surrounded by energy barriers designed to contain the most violent encounters between species whose natural abilities could level buildings. The surface was covered with a material that provided optimal traction for dozens of different foot and claw configurations, while embedded sensors monitored every aspect of the combatant's vital signs. Jackson sat in the front row of the human section, his stomach churning with nervous energy as he watched the pre-fight preparations. Beside him, Sarah Martinez gripped her seat so tightly her knuckles had turned white, while David Park continuously checked and rechecked the medical emergency protocols on his portable data pad. She's really going to do this, Sarah whispered, more to herself than to her companions. She knows what she's doing, Jackson replied, though his voice lacked conviction. Despite Maya's confidence the previous evening, the reality of watching her prepare to face a Zenthari warrior in single combat was almost overwhelming. Across the arena, the alien sections buzzed with excited conversation. Zenthari cadets had claimed an entire section, their scales displaying the bright patterns that indicated extreme excitement and aggression. Krolix spectators stamped their feet in rhythmic patterns that made the entire structure vibrate, while the ethereal Veiltar sat in perfect silence, their large black eyes focused on the empty ring with unsettling intensity. Look at them, David muttered, gesturing toward the alien sections. They think this is entertainment. They're here to watch a human get torn apart. Maybe, Jackson admitted. Or maybe they're about to see something that changes how they think about humans forever.
The crowd's noise reached a crescendo as the first combatant entered the arena. Vexcar strode onto the platform with the confident bearing of a predator entering familiar territory. He had discarded his academy uniform in favor of traditional Zenthari combat attire, minimal clothing that left his muscled frame unencumbered while showcasing the natural weapons that made his species so feared. His scales had shifted to a deep crimson color that seemed to glow under the arena's lights, and his claws had been honed to razor sharpness for the occasion. When he moved, it was with the fluid grace of a creature born for violence, every step calculated to demonstrate the deadly efficiency that had made the Zenthari the galaxy's most respected military force. The alien sections of the arena erupted in appreciation, recognizing a master warrior preparing for what they assumed would be a brief and decisive demonstration of species superiority. Then, Maya entered from the opposite side of the arena, and the crowd's reaction shifted to something approaching disbelief. She wore the same minimal combat attire, but, on her smaller human frame it looked almost absurd. Where Vexcar's outfit emphasized his natural weapons and predatory build, Maya simply revealed how physically outmatched she appeared to be. She stood barely two-thirds his height and weight perhaps half as much, with no visible natural weapons or enhanced physical characteristics. But there was something in the way she moved that gave pause to the more perceptive observers. She didn't walk onto the platform like someone facing inevitable defeat. She moved with the same controlled confidence that had characterized her since her arrival at the academy, as if entering the arena was simply another item on her daily schedule. Academy Commandant Felvas, an ancient ethereal whose species had founded the Confederation centuries ago, rose from his position in the VIP section to address the crowd. His voice, amplified by the arena's sound system, carried the weight of absolute authority. "Cadets and faculty," he began, his words causing an immediate hush to fall over the assembled spectators, "you are here to witness a formal challenge between Cadet Vexcar of the Zenthari hegemony and Cadet Maya Chen of the Human Colonial Defense Force." He paused, allowing his gaze to sweep across the arena. Such challenges are rare, and challenges between species of significantly different physical capabilities are unprecedented. However, both combatants have insisted on their right to settle their dispute through combat, and Academy regulations support their decision. The Commandant's expression grew more serious. The rules are simple. Victory by submission, incapacitation, or withdrawal from the ring. No weapons beyond natural physical abilities. Medical intervention will occur only if a combatant is unable to continue. Are both parties prepared? Vexcar raised one clawed hand in acknowledgement, his reptilian features twisted in what passed for a confident smile among his people. The gesture drew cheers from the alien sections, particularly the Zenthari cadets who began chanting his name in their native language. Maya simply nodded, her expression calm and focused. The human section responded with their own cheer, though it sounded thin and desperate compared to the overwhelming support for their opponent. "Then, let the challenge begin," Commandant Felbas declared, stepping back as the energy barriers activated around the ring. For several seconds, the two combatants circled each other warily. Vexcar moved in the traditional Zenthari hunting pattern, his claws extended and his body coiled for explosive action. His reptilian eyes tracked Maya's every movement, calculating angles and distances with predatory precision. Maya, by contrast, seemed almost casual in her approach. She kept her hands relaxed at her sides and maintained a steady, measured pace around the ring's perimeter. To most observers, she looked like someone taking a leisurely walk rather than preparing for potentially lethal combat. "She's trying to tire him out," someone whispered in the human section. "Make him waste energy while she conserves hers." But Jackson noticed something different in Maya's movement. She wasn't trying to avoid confrontation, she was studying her opponent with the same analytical intensity he brought to tactical problems. She was gathering information, learning patterns, and formulating a strategy based on observations rather than assumptions. Vexcar grew impatient with the circling and launched his first attack. He moved with blinding speed, closing the distance between them in a single explosive leap, his claws aimed at Maya's throat in a strike that should have ended the fight immediately. Maya wasn't there when he arrived. She had stepped aside at the last possible moment, not with frantic desperation but with minimal, efficient movement that suggested she had known exactly where and when the attack would come. Vexcar's claws swept through empty air as he stumbled past her, thrown off balance by the absence of expected resistance. The crowd's reaction was immediate and divided. The alien sections buzzed with confusion and irritation, while the human section erupted in surprised cheers. This wasn't what anyone had expected from the opening exchange. Vexcar recovered quickly, spinning to face Maya with renewed aggression. His scales had darkened to almost black, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. He had expected to end this farce with a single, decisive blow. Instead, he found himself facing an opponent who seemed to anticipate his every move. His second attack was more calculated, a series of rapid slashing strikes designed to force Maya backward until she was trapped against the arena's energy barriers. Each strike was potentially lethal, executed with the precision that had made him one of the Academy's most feared combat instructors. But, again, Maya seemed to dance around his attacks with an economy of movement that bordered on the supernatural. She didn't dodge so much as flow, positioning herself in the spaces between his strikes as if she could see the pattern of his assault before it unfolded. How is she doing that? David whispered, his engineering mind struggling to process what he was witnessing. His reaction time should be 3 times faster than hers. Maybe reaction time isn't everything, Jackson replied, beginning to understand what Maya had tried to explain the previous evening. Maybe there's something more important than raw physical ability. As if responding to his words, Maya shifted from defensive movement to offensive action. She stepped inside Vexcar's guard during one of his attacks, moving closer to his body than any sane opponent should have dared. At that range, his claws became useless, he couldn't generate the momentum needed for effective strikes without risking hitting himself. What followed was a demonstration of combat principles that no one in the arena had ever seen applied against a Zenthri warrior. Maya's attacks were precise, controlled, and targeted at pressure points and nerve clusters that most species didn't even know existed. She struck at the junction where Vexcar's neck met his shoulders, causing his left arm to go temporarily numb. She drove her elbow into a specific point on his ribcage that disrupted his breathing rhythm without causing permanent damage. Most importantly, she never tried to match his strength with her own. Instead, she used his momentum against him, redirecting his attacks and turning his natural advantages into liabilities that left him increasingly off balance and frustrated. The crowd's noise reached deafening levels as they realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't the quick, brutal lesson in species hierarchy that everyone had expected. This was an actual fight between equally matched opponents, despite the obvious physical disparities. Vexcar, recognizing that his traditional tactics were failing, attempted to change his approach. He backed away from Maya, trying to create space where his reach and speed advantages could be more effective. But Maya followed him, staying close enough to negate his natural weapons while remaining mobile enough to avoid being grappled. She's controlling the range, Sarah breathed, her xenobiology training allowing her to understand the tactical implications. She's forcing him to fight at the distance where her advantages are strongest. What advantages? David asked. She's smaller, slower, and weaker than he is. Experience, Jackson said suddenly, pieces of the puzzle clicking together in his mind. She's fought opponents like this before. She knows things about Zenthri combat techniques that he doesn't know she knows. As if to prove his point, Maya executed a move that drew gasps from the alien sections of the arena. When Vexcar attempted another slashing attack, she grabbed his extended arm and used his own momentum to throw him across the ring with a technique that looked like it belonged in a training manual for handling larger, stronger opponents. Vexcar hit the arena floor hard, his scales scraping against the textured surface as he slid toward the energy barriers. For a moment, the entire arena fell silent as everyone processed what they had just witnessed. A human had just thrown a Zenthri warrior like he weighed nothing. Impossible, someone whispered in the Zenthri section. No human possesses that kind of strength. But Jackson understood what had really happened. Maya hadn't overpowered her opponent, she had used physics, leverage, and superior technique to accomplish something that appeared impossible but was actually just extremely difficult. Vexcar struggled to his feet, his reptilian features showing confusion and growing fear. Nothing in his training had prepared him for this kind of opponent. Every tactic he attempted was countered, every advantage he possessed was neutralized, and his opponent seemed to anticipate his moves before he made them. Yield, Maya said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the suddenly hushed arena. You fought well, but this won't end the way you wanted to. The offer of mercy drew shocked murmurs from every section of the arena. In Zenthri culture, offering quarter to an opponent was a gesture reserved for equals, not inferiors. The fact that a human was extending such consideration to one of their warriors was almost as shocking as the combat itself. Vexcar's response was a snarl of rage and humiliation. He launched himself at Maya with desperate fury, abandoning technique in favor of raw aggression.
His claws swept in wild arcs as he sought to end the fight through sheer violence, regardless of the consequences.
Maya's counter was swift and decisive.
She stepped into his wild charge, caught his arms in a complex joint lock that left him completely helpless, and applied just enough pressure to demonstrate that she could break both limbs if she chose to. "I said yield," she repeated, her voice still calm but carrying an undertone that made several alien spectators step back from their seats. Vexkar struggled against the hold for several seconds before the reality of his situation penetrated his fury. He was completely at her mercy, held in a position where any additional resistance would result in serious injury. Against all expectations, against everything he had believed about the natural order of the galaxy, he had been defeated by a human. He began, his voice choked with disbelief and wounded pride. "I yield." The words seemed to hang in the air for an eternal moment before the arena erupted in chaos. The human section exploded in celebration, their cheers echoing off the dome's ceiling with triumphant joy. But the reaction from the alien sections was more complex: shock, disbelief, and a growing recognition that they had just witnessed something that challenged their fundamental assumptions about species hierarchy. Maya released her hold and stepped back, offering Vexkar her hand to help him to his feet. The gesture was simple, but its symbolism was profound. She had defeated him completely, yet she showed no arrogance or cruelty in victory. Instead, she offered respect to a worthy opponent who had simply met someone better prepared for this particular fight. Vexkar stared at her extended hand for a long moment before accepting it, allowing her to help him stand. When he spoke, his voice carried a grudging respect that hadn't been there at the beginning of their encounter.
"How?" he asked simply. "How did you know our techniques so well?" Maya's smile held no mockery, only understanding.
"Because humans have been fighting Zenthari raiders in the Outer Rim for generations.
We've had to learn your strengths and weaknesses just to survive. What works against colonial defense forces doesn't necessarily work against someone who's been specifically trained to counter your advantages." She gestured toward the crowd, taking in the thousands of stunned faces staring down at them. "This academy teaches that humans are the weak link in the galactic chain.
But weakness and strength are relative concepts. In the right circumstances, with the right preparation, anyone can overcome their natural disadvantages." Commandant Felbas stepped forward to officially declare the match concluded, but his expression suggested he was still processing the implications of what he had witnessed. A human cadet had just defeated one of the Academy's most capable alien warriors in single combat, using techniques that suggested a level of preparation and experience that exceeded anything in the standard curriculum. As the crowd began to disperse, their conversations dominated by analysis and speculation about the fight, Jackson found himself looking at his fellow human cadets with new eyes. For the first time since arriving at the Academy, they walked with their heads held high, their voices strong and confident.
Maya had done more than win a single fight.
She had proven that humans could compete with the galaxy's most capable species when they stopped accepting other people's definitions of their limitations. And, as he watched her accept congratulations from cadets of every species, many of whom were approaching her with newfound respect and curiosity, Jackson realized that the Academy, and the galaxy beyond it, would never be quite the same again.
3 weeks after the duel, the Galactic Naval Academy felt like a different institution entirely.
The change wasn't immediately obvious to casual observers. Classes continued as scheduled, training exercises proceeded according to established protocols, and the daily routines that governed 30,000 cadets from 67 different species maintained their familiar rhythms. But, beneath the surface, fundamental assumptions that had shaped Academy culture for centuries were quietly crumbling. It began with small things. Human cadets who had previously spoken in whispers during meals now participated in discussions with confident voices.
Alien classmates who had once ignored human contributions to group projects began soliciting their input with genuine interest.
Instructors found themselves calling on human students more frequently, curious to hear perspectives that they had previously dismissed as irrelevant. But the most significant change was in the way conflicts between species were handled. The unspoken understanding that humans could be bullied without consequence had evaporated overnight, replaced by a cautious respect that extended far beyond the few individuals who had witnessed Maya's victory firsthand. Jackson experienced this transformation personally during his strategic analysis class, where Professor Kelfane, a renowned Vailtar military theorist, presented the weekly tactical scenario. The exercise involved defending a remote outpost against superior forces, a situation that typically showcased the advantages of species with enhanced physical capabilities or telepathic coordination. The scenario parameters are straightforward: Professor Kelthane announced to the mixed species class. You command a garrison of 50 defenders facing an attacking force of 200. Your position is well fortified but isolated, with no possibility of reinforcement for 72 hours. How do you maintain your position? Traditionally, these exercises followed predictable patterns. Zenthari cadets proposed aggressive counterattacks that relied on superior individual combat ability. Krolik students favored straightforward defensive strategies that maximized their natural strength advantages. Veiltar participants developed complex coordination plans that leveraged their telepathic communication capabilities. Human contributions, when they were solicited at all, typically involved logistical support roles or technological solutions that avoided direct confrontation. It was an unspoken assumption that humans weren't capable of developing strategies that relied on combat effectiveness. But today was different. Cadet Reeves, Professor Kelthane said, his large black eyes focusing on Jackson with what appeared to be genuine curiosity. Your analysis? Jackson felt the familiar flutter of nervousness that had once paralyzed him during these moments, but it was accompanied by something new, a confidence born from watching one of his species accomplish the impossible. He stood and activated the holographic display that showed the tactical scenario in 3 dimensions. The conventional approach would be to maximize our defensive advantages and hope to outlast the siege, he began, manipulating the display to highlight key terrain features. But that assumes the enemy is willing to accept a prolonged engagement. He paused, noting the interested expressions on faces that had previously shown only polite tolerance for human input. However, if we consider the psychological factors involved, there's another approach. The display shifted to show troop movements that seemed almost reckless in their audacity. We conduct a series of night raids against their supply lines, using small teams that can move undetected through terrain that larger forces would find impassable. The goal isn't to destroy their supplies, it's to make them question their intelligence about our capabilities. Sethkara, a Zenthari cadet whose cousin had been present at Maya's duel, leaned forward with obvious interest. Explain the psychological component. Most species base their tactical planning on assumptions about their opponent's capabilities, Jackson continued, warming to his subject. They expect humans to behave in predictable ways, to focus on defensive positions, to avoid direct confrontation, to seek technological solutions to physical problems. The display showed how small human teams could exploit those assumptions, appearing in places where no rational defender should be willing or able to go. But what if we don't behave according to their expectations? What if we show up where they think we can't, do things they think we won't, and demonstrate capabilities they think we don't possess? The raiders would be slaughtered, objected Throck, a Krolix cadet whose massive frame dwarfed everyone else in the classroom. Human forces couldn't survive direct contact with superior numbers. Not direct contact, Jackson agreed. But humans excel at improvisation, at finding unconventional solutions to impossible problems. We've had to, it's how our species has survived in a galaxy where we're outmatched in almost every measurable category. He gestured to a series of tactical positions that appeared indefensible by conventional standards. These raids aren't about winning through superior force. They're about winning through superior unpredictability. By the time the enemy adapts to our tactics, we've already changed them. Professor Kelthane studied the holographic display with growing fascination. As a Veiltar, his species prided itself on intellectual superiority and strategic thinking, but he had to admit that this human's approach demonstrated a level of creative tactical thinking that impressed him. Continue, he said simply. The key is that each raid teaches us something about their response patterns while teaching them something false about our capabilities, Jackson explained. After 3 or 4 encounters, they'll develop a profile of human tactical behavior based on incomplete information. Then, we do something completely different. The display shifted to show the final phase of the operation, a coordinated assault that came from directions the enemy would have learned to consider impossible. By the time they realize we've been conducting a deliberate deception campaign, we've already achieved our strategic objective. The classroom fell silent as students and instructor alike processed the implications of what they had heard. This wasn't the kind of defensive, technology-dependent strategy they expected from human tactical thinking. This was aggressive, psychologically sophisticated warfare that relied on turning perceived weaknesses into operational advantages. Fascinating, Professor Kelthane said finally. Your approach assumes that the enemy's preconceptions about human limitations can be weaponized against them. Every species in the Confederation has assumptions about what humans can and can't do, Jackson replied. most of those assumptions are based on limited data and cultural biases rather than actual observation.
In the right circumstances, those assumptions become vulnerabilities we can exploit.
The discussion that followed was unlike any Jackson had experienced during his time at the academy. Alien classmates who had previously ignored his contributions now engaged with his ideas as equals, building on his concepts and challenging his assumptions in ways that suggested genuine intellectual respect. But the real measure of how much had changed came during the lunch break, when Zethkara approached him in the corridor outside the classroom.
"That was impressive tactical thinking," the Zenthari cadet said without preamble. "I'd like to hear more about these unconventional warfare concepts."
"You would?" Jackson asked, still struggling to process the fact that a Zenthari, a member of the galaxy's premier warrior species, was seeking his insights on military strategy.
"My cousin was present at the duel 3 weeks ago," Zethkara continued.
He said it forced him to reconsider everything he thought he knew about human capabilities.
"Your tactical analysis suggests there might be broader implications to explore."
As they walked together toward the dining facility, Jackson realized that Maya's victory had accomplished something even more significant than proving human combat effectiveness. It had created space for other humans to demonstrate their own unique strengths, to show that human contributions to galactic civilization went far beyond simply filling quotas and providing diversity.
But the changes weren't limited to individual relationships between cadets.
The Academy's administration had begun to take notice of what many were calling the human factor, a growing recognition that their assumptions about species' capabilities might be fundamentally flawed. This became evident during an unexpected summons to Commandant Thelvas's office, where Jackson found himself face to face with the ancient ethereal who governed the Academy's operations. The Commandant's office was a study in understated power, with artifacts from dozens of worlds arranged around a space that seemed to exist slightly outside normal dimensional parameters. "Cadet Reeves," the Commandant began, his voice carrying the weight of centuries, "your performance in strategic analysis has drawn attention from several quarters." Jackson remained at attention, uncertain why he had been called for this private meeting. "Sir, I was simply contributing to classroom discussion as requested."
"Indeed," Thelvas replied, gesturing for him to take a seat.
"But, your contributions represent a perspective that we may have undervalued in our curriculum development.
Tell me, do you believe your tactical insights are representative of human strategic thinking in general?"
The question was loaded with implications that Jackson wasn't entirely sure he understood.
"I think humans bring a unique perspective to military problems because we've had to be creative to survive.
We can't rely on superior physical abilities or natural advantages, so we've learned to find other approaches."
"Other approaches," the Commandant repeated thoughtfully.
"Yes, that describes much of what we've observed recently. Cadet Chen's combat performance, your tactical analysis, and several other incidents have suggested that our understanding of human capabilities may be incomplete." He activated a holographic display that showed Academy performance statistics spanning several decades. These metrics have traditionally shown human cadets performing adequately in theoretical subjects but poorly in practical applications. We attributed this to species limitations. The display shifted to show more recent data, highlighting changes that had occurred since Maya's arrival. However, recent events suggest that our testing methods may have been measuring the wrong variables.
When humans are presented with scenarios that don't conform to their expectations, their performance improves dramatically.
"I'm not sure I understand, sir," Jackson admitted.
"Cadet Chen didn't defeat Vexkar through superior physical ability," Thelvas explained.
"She won by approaching the problem from a direction that negated his natural advantages. Similarly, your tactical solutions work not because they're more powerful than conventional approaches, but because they operate outside the framework that conventional approaches assume."
The implications began to dawn on Jackson.
"You think we've been testing humans using criteria that don't match our actual strengths?"
"Precisely," the Commandant confirmed.
"Which raises interesting questions about how we evaluate and utilize human capabilities within the broader Confederation military structure." He leaned back in his chair, studying Jackson with eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of interstellar civilizations. "I'm authorizing a comprehensive review of our training protocols, with particular attention to how they accommodate different species' cognitive and strategic approaches."
"I want you to lead the human perspective on this review." "Me?" Jackson asked, stunned by the unexpected responsibility.
"You've demonstrated an ability to translate human tactical thinking into concepts that other species can understand and appreciate," Thelvas explained.
More importantly, you've shown that human strategic contributions can be valuable when properly recognized and utilized. As Jackson left the commandant's office with his new assignment, he found Maya waiting for him in the corridor outside. Her expression suggested she had been expecting this development. "Congratulations," she said with a smile that held genuine warmth. "Though I suspect this is just the beginning." "Beginning of what?" Jackson asked. "Of humans taking their rightful place in this galaxy," Maya replied. "Not as the weak link that needs protection, but as the unpredictable factor that changes everything." She gestured toward the Academy's corridors, where human and alien cadets mingled with an ease that would have been unthinkable a month ago. "You've shown them that human strategic thinking has value. Now others will start to recognize that we bring capabilities they didn't know they needed." As they walked together through halls that no longer felt hostile to human presence, Jackson realized that his life and the lives of every human in the Academy had been fundamentally transformed. They were no longer outsiders grateful for acceptance. They were equals demanding recognition for their unique contributions to galactic civilization. And, across the Academy, word was spreading that the human cadets weren't just keeping up with their alien classmates, they were beginning to lead them in directions no one had thought to explore. 6 months later, the emergency session of the Galactic Confederation High Command convened in the crystalline chambers of Proxima Station, the massive space facility that served as the military headquarters for 12,000 worlds. The gathered representatives included the supreme commanders of every major species, their advisors, and intelligence analysts who had been monitoring a disturbing trend in recent combat reports. Admiral Zarthak of the Zen-3 hegemony activated the central holographic display with a gesture of his clawed hand, his scaled features betraying an unusual degree of concern. As the supreme military leader of the galaxy's most respected warrior species, he was accustomed to briefing subordinates on standard tactical situations. This meeting was anything but standard. "The purpose of this emergency session," he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber, "is to address a series of incidents that have fundamentally challenged our understanding of human military capabilities." The holographic display showed a star map of the Outer Rim territories, where the boundaries of Confederation space met the hostile regions controlled by various raider species, rogue factions, and unaligned alien empires. These sectors had long been considered the most dangerous assignments in the galaxy, typically reserved for elite units from the most capable species. 3 months ago, the 47th Colonial Defense Regiment, a human unit stationed in the Kepler sector, successfully repelled a coordinated assault by a Korthak raider fleet that outnumbered them 8-1, Admiral Zarthak continued, manipulating the display to show the battle's progression. Initial reports attributed this victory to superior defensive positions and technological advantages. General Frokmar, the massive Krolix commander whose species dominated the Confederation's heavy assault divisions, leaned forward with obvious skepticism. "Human forces have achieved defensive victories before. Their technology and fortifications can compensate for individual weakness when properly deployed." "That was our initial assessment," Admiral Zarthak agreed. "However, subsequent analysis reveals that the humans didn't simply defend their positions. They conducted a series of offensive operations that systematically dismantled a numerically superior force through what can only be described as tactically impossible maneuvers." The display shifted to show detailed combat telemetry that tracked individual unit movements throughout the engagement. What emerged was a picture of warfare unlike anything the Confederation military had encountered in its extensive experience with human forces. Human squads had appeared behind enemy lines without using detectable transportation methods. Supply convoys had been destroyed by forces that shouldn't have been able to reach them. Command vessels had been disabled by boarding parties that had somehow penetrated defensive systems designed to stop much larger assault forces. "How?" asked Commander Veltar, the ethereal representative whose species had designed many of the strategic doctrines that governed Confederation military operations. "Our tactical analysis suggests these operations should have been impossible given known human physical and technological limitations." "That's the disturbing part," Admiral Zarthak replied. "The impossible operations succeeded because they were based on tactical principles that we don't recognize. The humans didn't try to overcome their limitations, they built strategies around them." He gestured to specific data points on the display. When conventional assault tactics would have failed, they used stealth and misdirection. When direct confrontation would have been suicidal, they created scenarios where superior numbers became a liability. When standard defensive positions would have been overrun, they made the enemy come to them on terms that negated their natural advantages.
One engagement can be attributed to luck or exceptional leadership, interjected Admiral Kethris, whose aquatic nereid species commanded the Confederation's naval forces.
But, we're discussing a pattern of behavior that suggests systematic capability enhancement. Admiral Zarthek nodded grimly. Indeed. Which brings us to the second incident, the liberation of the Tau Ceti mining colonies.
The display shifted to show another star system, this one deep in Confederation space where such dramatic military actions should have been unnecessary. 2 months ago, the colonies were seized by a separatist movement backed by vegan mercenaries. The rebels had established heavily fortified positions and commanded significant local support.
Standard protocol would have been to deploy a mixed-species task force for a conventional assault, General Throckmar observed.
Heavy Krolix units supported by Zenthari rapid response teams and Veiltar coordination specialists.
That was indeed the initial plan, Admiral Zarthek confirmed.
However, the Human Colonial Administration requested permission to resolve the situation using only local defense forces. The request was approved largely because High Command assumed human forces would be unable to mount an effective assault, making diplomatic solutions more attractive to all parties. The display showed what happened instead, a campaign that had redefined how the Confederation understood the concept of military effectiveness. Rather than attempting to match the rebels' fortifications with superior force, the human defenders had launched a psychological warfare campaign that was both subtle and devastating. They didn't attack the rebel positions, they made the positions irrelevant. Supply lines were disrupted not through direct assault but through systematic manipulation of local civilian populations who were convinced to stop cooperating with the occupying forces. Communication networks were compromised not through technological interference but through social engineering that turned the rebels' own coordination systems against them. Most remarkably, the human forces had convinced nearly 30% of the rebel troops to defect by demonstrating that their cause was based on false information deliberately spread by their vegan mercenary advisors. The entire operation was concluded without a single major engagement, Admiral Zarthek reported. The rebels surrendered when they realized their position had become completely untenable through means they couldn't counter because they couldn't understand them. Commander Veltar's large eyes displayed the rapid blinking pattern that indicated intense cognitive processing among his species. These tactics suggest a level of strategic sophistication that contradicts our baseline assessments of human military capability. Which brings us to the most recent incident, Admiral Zarthek said, his tone growing even more serious. The Battle of Wolf 359. A collective murmur ran through the chamber as the representatives recognized the significance of that designation. Wolf 359 was the site of a major Confederation fleet base that defended one of the most crucial hyperspace routes in the galaxy. Any threat to that system represented a potential catastrophe for galactic shipping and communication. 4 weeks ago, a Korthak battle fleet numbering 47 vessels attempted to seize control of the Wolf 359 hyperspace nexus, Admiral Zar.